Rich tourist spits in royal guard's face. What happened next was truly unforgettable. A tourist who thought he could humiliate a royal guard and get away with it spat in his face in a shocking act of disrespect. But what happened next stunned the crowd and turned the viral moment into a powerful lesson in dignity, honor, and restraint. Subscribe and stay tuned to see what happens next. On a bright summer day in London, with the sun glinting off the black and gold gates of Buckingham Palace, a familiar symbol stood motionless before a crowd of tourists, Guard Thomas Blackwood. Dressed in his scarlet tunic, tall bearskin cap, and white gloves, Blackwood wasn't just part of the spectacle. He was a living emblem of centuries-old military tradition. For many, the Queen's Guard may appear ceremonial, but for those who've served, or who understand service, his presence carried far deeper meaning. At just 29, Blackwood had already completed 2 tours in Afghanistan, earning quiet commendations and lifelong scars. Yet each morning, he would rise at dawn, spending over 3 meticulous hours preparing his uniform, ensuring every button, crease, and strap met the highest standard of discipline. For him, this wasn't performance, it was duty. To many of the Canadian seniors watching from home, this sense of pride and precision evoked memories of a time when honor, commitment, and service meant everything. In that polished uniform stood not just a soldier, but a reminder of a world where values were worn with quiet dignity, not loud declarations. And on this day, that dignity was about to be tested in a way no one could predict. Among the sea of curious tourists stood a man whose presence quickly shifted the mood. Kevin Reynolds, a wealthy visitor from Texas, strutted through the crowd with the entitled confidence of someone used to getting his way. Wearing an expensive polo shirt and reeking of arrogance and scotch, he spotted Guard, Blackwood standing silently at attention. What began as casual mockery soon escalated. Reynolds posed beside the Guard, made faces, waved a hand in front of his eyes, and loudly joked to the crowd, "Bet I can make him crack." But the Queen's Guard is no sideshow. For those in uniform, particularly those with combat experience like Blackwood, silence is strength, not weakness. Many in the crowd grew uneasy. Canadian tourists, veterans and seniors visiting the palace exchanged disapproving glances. They understood the weight of the uniform. It's not just fabric, it's a statement of honor, discipline, and sacrifice. But Reynolds pushed on, emboldened by his friends filming every moment for social media. He hovered close, tested boundaries, and mocked British tradition. Then, in a stunning moment of disrespect, he spat directly onto Blackwood's cheek. It was a line crossed, a moment where every Canadian watching would have felt a gut reaction of disbelief. In our culture, we teach respect not only for individuals, but for what they represent. And here was a young soldier, holding decades of tradition and service, standing stoically in the face of blatant disrespect. For many older Canadians, this wasn't just a tourist acting poorly. It was a confrontation between arrogance and honor, between thoughtless spectacle and timeless duty. And as the crowd held its breath, it became clear. This wasn't just another palace visit. It was a defining moment that would remind the world what true character looks like under pressure. What happened next is something few in the crowd would ever forget. After enduring Kevin Reynolds' mockery, insults, and even a spit to the face, Lieutenant Thomas Blackwood didn't flinch. He didn't shout, retaliate, or break his ceremonial stance. Instead, in a moment of quiet strength, he slowly wiped his cheek with a white-gloved hand and, when given permission by his commanding officer, turned to address the crowd. His words weren't rehearsed. They came from a place of service, experience, and deep personal integrity. He spoke not of revenge, but of duty. Blackwood reminded those gathered that his uniform wasn't a costume. It was a symbol of centuries of discipline and sacrifice. He spoke of his tours in Afghanistan, of the brothers he'd lost, and the values he carried forward with every shift at Buckingham Palace. For Canadians watching, especially those who've served or remember the sacrifices of past generations, Blackwood's calm response carried more weight than any show of force ever could. There was no bitterness in his tone, only clarity. He didn't lecture Reynolds, he educated him. He didn't tear him down. He held up the mirror of truth. His voice echoed across the courtyard and across the digital world as the video of his response went viral. For many older Canadians, it felt like a reminder of a time when dignity mattered, when strength came from composure, and when service meant something deeper than ceremony. In a world increasingly defined by confrontation and ego, Blackwood stood as a reminder of what we once taught in homes, classrooms, and regiments, that true strength is found in restraint. His words, like his presence, were measured, but they cut through the noise like a northern wind, bracing, honest, and impossible to ignore. The impact of Lieutenant Blackwood's calm and dignified response rippled far beyond the gates of Buckingham Palace. Within hours, video footage of the incident had circulated across social media, sparking a wave of admiration, not for a dramatic reaction, but for the powerful restraint he displayed. Across Canada, particularly among seniors and veterans, the story touched a nerve. It reminded many of a time when respect for service, tradition, and character stood at the heart of our national identity. From British Columbia to Nova Scotia, conversations began unfolding in retirement homes, Legion halls, and living rooms. Veterans recognized in Blackwood a kindred spirit, someone who upheld the values they themselves had once sworn to protect. Parents used the moment to teach their grandchildren the importance of honor, reminding them that true leadership is shown in action, not anger. Canadian news outlets and radio stations covered the story, not just as entertainment, but as a meaningful lesson. What began as a tourist's thoughtless provocation ended as a national moment of reflection. Even schools began using the video in classrooms to highlight themes of respect, courage, and integrity. For older Canadians, it was reassuring to see that values they hold dear, like quiet strength, service without complaint, and respect for uniformed roles, are still alive. In an age when so much seems loud and divisive, Blackwood's response stood out because it was composed. It didn't demand respect. It inspired it. This incident wasn't just about a soldier and a disrespectful tourist. It became a cultural milestone, reminding us all, especially those who have lived through decades of social change, that honor, once earned, never fades. It continues to shine through those who carry it with humility and strength, even when no one expects them to. In the days that followed the incident, what lingered wasn't the disgrace of the tourist, but the quiet heroism of Guard Blackwood. His actions sparked more than headlines. They sparked conversations across Canada about what it truly means to be strong. In a world where instant reactions and loud opinions often overshadow thoughtful restraint, Blackwood reminded us that real courage can be silent, firm, and rooted in principle. For Canadian seniors, many of whom have lived through world wars, peacekeeping missions, and decades of social evolution, this moment was deeply meaningful. It reaffirmed that the values they've long cherished, honor, duty, and respect, still matter. Blackwood didn't retaliate. He didn't speak with pride or bravado. He responded with dignity, upholding the integrity of his uniform and his role. Perhaps the greatest legacy of this moment is how it has become a teaching tool. Across schools, veteran centers, and community groups, Blackwood's story is being shared as an example of character in action. It's not just about military decorum. It's about being the kind of person who leads by example, even when provoked. For seniors watching this unfold, it was more than just a viral video. It was a reminder that strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it stands still, speaks calmly, and holds the line with quiet confidence. In the end, it wasn't the insult that made the greatest impression. It was the guard's unshaken response. His story will live on as a modern parable, not about conflict, but about the power of discipline, service, and quiet grace. And in a time when the world often forgets the quiet heroes among us, Canadians, especially our elders, were proud to be reminded of one who stood tall, not just in posture, but in purpose. What began as a tourist's crude attempt at internet fame became something far more enduring, a national conversation about dignity, honor, and restraint. Lieutenant Thomas Blackwood's steadfast response to an act of blatant disrespect didn't just restore order, it restored faith. In an era where sensationalism often drowns out substance, his calm and principled stand reminded Canadians that there is still strength in silence, grace in self-control, and power in integrity. In the weeks that followed, Blackwood's moment became more than a viral clip. It became a case study. Military academies and police colleges across Canada began using the footage to teach a crucial lesson: that respect isn't enforced by fear, but earned through example. Veterans organizations spoke out in praise, recognizing Blackwood not only as a ceremonial figure, but as a soldier's soldier, someone who carries the weight of tradition with quiet pride. For many older Canadians, his actions brought a deep sense of validation. Here was a young man who embodied the values they were raised to uphold: stand your ground, act with principle, and let your actions speak louder than your anger. It wasn't the grandeur of his uniform that earned admiration. It was how he chose to wear it, with humility and resolve. The man who spat on the guard faded quickly into obscurity, his fame short-lived. But Blackwood's story endures, not for the insult he endured, but for the character he displayed in its wake. In cities from Vancouver to St. John's, Canadians of all ages have taken note. And for seniors, especially, it was a reminder that real leadership isn't flashy. It stands tall, even when challenged, and protects not just people, but the principles we hold dear. In a world that often celebrates loud voices and quick tempers, the story of Lieutenant Thomas Blackwood offers a timeless reminder. True strength lies in restraint. When faced with public humiliation and disrespect, he didn't retaliate with anger. Instead, he responded with dignity, discipline, and calm, a rare kind of courage that speaks volumes, especially to those who have lived through decades of societal change. For many Canadian seniors, this moment rekindles the values they were raised with: respect, patience, and the belief that honor isn't something demanded, it's something earned through consistent action. Blackwood's poise reminds us that leadership isn't about titles or appearances, but about how we treat others when no one expects us to stand up. This story teaches a lesson we can carry with us every day. We don't need to shout to be heard, and we don't need to fight to show strength. Sometimes, simply standing firm in our values, quietly, respectfully, is enough to change a moment, a room, or even a generation. It's a message worth sharing, especially with grandchildren and younger generations, that in life, the greatest strength is often shown not in how loudly we speak, but in how bravely we hold our silence.